Welcome to Healthy Living with Julie. Today we have a special guest on the show, Sylvia Marusyk, who is an international activational speaker and also an occupational therapist. I had the pleasure of meeting her on a trip last year to Mexico, and she has become such a great friend, and I just feel so blessed to have her on the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell us how this came about for you, how you became an international speaker?
Yeah, it's interesting. On my website, I have a little video that kind of talks a little bit about me and about what I do. And on that video, I talk about this happening by accident. That's how some people would see it. And other people would maybe see it as my calling. And that's really how I feel about it, because health and well-being has become literally a crusade for me. It is everything to me in terms of my occupation. It's how I live my life, and it's my priority in my life. And what I see is that as an occupational therapist, I was treating all of these sick people, but I knew that they didn't have to be sick. Not everyone has to be sick. And I began wondering what would happen if our healthcare system really focused on prevention, and what if we focused on prevention? Then I wouldn't have all these sick people to look after. And after 10 years of dealing with injury and sickness and disease and death, because I also worked on palliative care, I just switched tracks in my professional career to be a crusader of prevention, which led me to professional speaking. And it was a little bit of an interesting course of events. I did a presentation for one particular employer in Manitoba, a large employer, and it just kind of spread like wildfire throughout the organization. And from that, I was recommended as a speaker at a conference, a local conference, a safety conference. And in fact, that's really where I cut my teeth as a professional speaker, was in the field of safety. Eventually, after doing that conference year after year, after about 3 years, I was picked up by a National Speakers Bureau. And the rest is history, as they say.
Now today we're going to touch a bit on stress and stress prevention.
Right. So that's a really big one for me. When I first started, I was talking about injury prevention. That's how I first began professional speaking. What I soon realized is that everybody that has injuries, or that has, and it was mostly workplace injuries, everyone that has injuries either has extreme stress as a result of the injury, or the injury was precipitated by stress. So for example, workers who are stressed out have a higher risk of injury and safety issues. So in 2012, there was a really interesting study. It's a Canadian study looking at the number of accidents that were happening across the country. And in 2012, 80% of the accidents that were happening in workplaces in Canada were actually happening to people who reported that they were stressed out at the time of the accident. So we know that stress has a huge impact on safety. And so from injury prevention, I began getting very interested in how stress was affecting people. And I had certainly had my own experience with that. I lived in a very abusive household, and I watched my mother literally, like a slow suicide, over years of abuse and stress, just lose not just her zest for life and her vitality, but her actual health. And she died at 66. And I could see that same, very similar pattern of poor health in my own life. And I realized this is kind of the next step for me, is I need to really zero in on how stress is hurting people and how it's transforming healthy people into unhealthy people. Our issues live in our tissues. I say that in every presentation. It's in my book. I'm writing a book about this right now. And my signature keynote is called Stressed to Kill, because that is what's happening. And we know that stress is the #1 health epidemic in North America. Stress leaves are costing over $50 billion a year. Now, we think that's a conservative estimate because this is not gender stereotyping. So I don't want any hate mail about this, but men will more often go off with a physical symptom like a heart attack instead of a stress leave, but it's precipitated by stress. And the reason for that is because often men, and again, not gender stereotyping, but often men will wait until the stress is so extreme that it manifests in something physical. Women often will tune in a little bit more, or maybe earlier, and recognize that they are dealing with burnout. So when we look at that statistic, probably $50 billion a year is half of what's really going on. So stress leaves are at an all-time high. The other interesting thing, when we look at what are the stressors that people are dealing with, the #1 stressor reported by the Canadian workforce is work. It's not sickness, it's not family, it's not financial well-being, although finance is a very close second to work, but work is the #1 stressor we are dealing with in Canada. So we have a problem. We have a serious problem, and if we don't do something different, we're going to die. Actually, we're going to die anyway, right? That's the thing. This is not about extending life expectancy. Managing stress differently is about living well until you die, because nobody knows the date.
Quality of life.
It's quality of life. It's living without sickness and disease. In 1996, the International Association of Researchers on Cortisols and Anti-Cortisols put out a really frightening statement. And what they said is that we now have proof that too much stress, which creates too much cortisol, is so toxic to the human body in the amounts that we produce it in, and the amount of time that we are constantly producing this cortisol, that it causes cancer. Like, who knew stress could cause cancer? We think we've heard that. We think there's an association. We have proof. Diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, substance abuse disorders, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, depression. And it's a contributor to the development of autoimmune diseases. All because of too much cortisol, our stress hormone that we produce when we are in fight or flight. So we have the capacity to create all these illnesses, and people think, well, really? Because I'm stressed out over my mother-in-law or over my workplace, I could get cancer? If you don't believe that the human mind body, because we're a mind and a body, these are not separate, if you don't believe that we have that power, all you have to do is close your eyes, and I do this with my audiences often. Close your eyes, and I take them on a little meditation of cutting open a really juicy lemon and then putting it, are you salivating? Just thinking about it? I just had the reaction, right? So when you imagine eating it, your salivary glands turn on. There's no lemon here. That's the power of your mind body, to create a physiological response in your body because of a thought. And that is how stress causes cancer. Every thought we have creates a biochemical reaction in our body that is either health promoting or it's harmful. And we'll talk more about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sylvia. You give me goosebumps just talking. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living with Julie. With Sylvia today, we are talking about stress and the negative effects that it has on your body. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the symptoms?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the first thing I want to say about symptoms is that we don't always tune in, but symptoms are a language. So the symptoms of distress, that's when we're kind of overloaded with stress, are often, they start subtle, and then when we don't pay attention, the body, it's like a small child tugging at your hem. If you don't pay attention, the child might tug harder. And so symptoms are a language, a way of communicating that says that something's not right. And what we most often do is ignore the subtle things, and we pay attention when we're sick. So many of you have heard the boiled frog analogy. So you're gonna have to take my word for this. Don't try this at home. I took someone's word for it. But the boiled frog story or analogy goes that if you take a frog and put it in water and put that, I know, right? Put it in a pot of water and put it on the stove.
Don't try this at home.
Right. We're definitely not advocating animal cruelty. But if you inch up the water just a little bit, a few degrees at a time, that frog will actually constantly accommodate to the point where it boils to death. It will not jump. True or not, that is so us. We constantly accommodate to a certain level of craziness or chaos in our lives, and we actually create much of it ourselves. But we accommodate to it and accommodate to it and accommodate to it. And like, how hot is your water, people? You need to take the temperature of the water that you're in and see if you're safe or not. Because if it's hot, you are not safe. You are close to boiling, which means illness and disease. And here's the thing. The effects of stress are so insidious over time that you actually don't necessarily realize how much your life has deteriorated. Like, how many of us are working all day, coming home, throwing something in the microwave that comes in a box, hitting the couch and not leaving the couch, and we think, oh, that's amazing. Do you know how many hours of your life you're not living? Like, we don't live to work, we work to live. Life begins at 4 o'clock or whatever quitting time is. That's when life begins. That's not when you stop living and hit the couch. Once in a while, that's great and it's fun, but that is not what our life should be. If you are not feeling like you are in really great health and living your best life, you need to take a step back and have a look at how hot the water is. So that's the first thing we need to understand. The symptoms are insidious, they develop slowly often, but if we don't do something, we become sick. So often we think of symptoms of stress as like the pounding heart, the panting that you might see like when you suddenly hit your brake in a near traffic accident, right? The pounding heart, the breathlessness, the feeling like you want to run, that jittery feeling, that's fight or flight. But we can be in fight or flight to any degree. That little bit of low-level anxiety when you get up and go to work every day because you hate the people you work with. That little bit of a nervous stomach that you feel when you know your mother-in-law is coming over. That feeling of kind of sickness or that bit of a headache, that kind of uneasy feeling when you have to have a conversation you don't want to have. That's one end of the spectrum. And then enraged, homicidal, I'm saying that jokingly, at the other end of the spectrum. That is all fight or flight. And so what we know about fight or flight is that that elevates our cortisol level, which is the dangerous stress hormone when we produce it over long periods of time in large amounts, because we're not hardwired to metabolize it in that way. So the symptoms that we experience associated with that high cortisol, if we leave it unchecked and continue, are all like everything you can think of, your mind body can create. Flu-like symptoms, hair loss, skin rashes, impotence, migraine headaches, stomach aches, leg pain, neck pain, shoulder pain. Do you know what you appear like in terms of your memory when you're stressed? What happens to your memory?
Memory loss.
Absolutely. You look demented. You look like you are at the beginning stages of dementia. Can't pay attention, no immediate recall, can't remember anything. You ask someone to do something, give them a 3-stage command. Can you go make a copy of this, put one in my file and put one in Jordan's file, and you've lost them at hey. They have no idea what you just said. So our memory is impaired. We become emotional. Our behavior changes. We eat more, or some of us don't eat, right? Everybody can relate to the fridge blackout. Who can't relate to that? You've come home from a stressful day at work, and all of a sudden you come to and you're in the fridge. It's like, what did I just snarf? That's an emotional binge. So these are all symptoms of stress and overload. And then one of the biggest symptoms we experience is inflammation. So every itis is inflammation. Plantar fasciitis is an inflammatory condition. Arthritis is an inflammatory condition. Bursitis is an inflammatory condition. Colitis is an inflammatory condition. The itises are really all about inflammation. So these are the things that we need to tune into, because they give us a clue that things have gone past the manageable point. Resilient people tune in to their symptoms, and instead of saying my headache is because I slept on a bad pillow last night, they go, I think my headache might be because I am stressing about this relationship with my micromanaging boss. I think I need to do something about that. So the symptoms are a language that we need to pay attention to. And what we need to talk about now, coming up next, will be, so how do we dump this? How do we dump this cortisol? How do we get rid of it from our bodies? And how do we create a prevention plan that keeps us safe and healthy?
God, I love you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living with Julie. Now that we've discussed the symptoms of stress, how do we prevent it? How do we deal with it?
That's a really good question. So most of us have a default way of dealing with stress. It's what we've seen our parents do. It's what we've gotten away with. So for example, if you saw your dad come home from a really stressful day at work and knock back 3 shots and fall asleep in his easy chair, and when he woke up he was happy and in a good mood, that might be something you do. Alternately, you might have seen your brother, when you were growing up, have temper tantrums when he was stressed and upset. And you looked at that, and when he got sent to his room, you thought to yourself, well, I'm not going to do that. So we've learned so much from the family of origin that we come from. And then we learn what works for us. So in a relationship, if I cry and stomp my feet, my partner gives in to me. So that's a behavior I'm going to continue. So when I'm upset, I cry, I get what I want, and then my stress level goes down. So most of us have learned pretty maladaptive coping skills. And I certainly did. Growing up in the home that I grew up in, my coping skill for dealing with the fear of antagonizing my very abusive father was to be perfect. Be a straight A student, follow every rule to the extreme, don't ever say anything you shouldn't, like just be the perfect child. And that carried with me into adulthood, where I could not tolerate the possibility of making a mistake.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, absolutely. My predominant emotional state was fear. Everything I did was fear-based. I had to always be perfect at everything. And so it's taken me a lot of years to figure out how to let go of that. But here's a fundamental, it's like there are some fundamental scientific truths. Here's one. Whatever lives inside you, you will just simply attract to confirm what you believe about yourself. So if you are fearful and always afraid that bad things will happen, guess what? They do.
Bad things will happen.
Right. If you are negative and angry and miserable and complaining, you will attract more things in your life to be angry, miserable, and complaining about. So we know that. So what do we do about this? Well, we need to learn better coping skills. And one of the ways that I make it easy is I look at coping skills from a biochemical point of view. When we look at what's so dangerous about stress, it's really about the level of that very dangerous hormone that we are producing, and that's cortisol. When we produce too much of that, it hurts us and it robs us of our health. It's not the quick death either, guys. Like when you think about what your death is or what it's going to be, it's like, okay, I just want to go to sleep one day and not wake up. But that's not what it's going to be like, man. We are going to lose our health. We're going to be sick. Thanks to modern medicine, we're going to be kept alive with maybe handfuls of pills, maybe 10 or 15 years past our natural expiry. This is not a commercial for euthanasia, by the way. But at what quality or with what quality? I want to be still aerating the lawns with my high-heeled stilettos and my nails done and my hair colored when I'm in my 80s. I want to be healthy until I die. And although we can't control that outcome, we can stack the deck in our favor. And so here's what I do, and here's what I teach. I loosely divide coping skills into kind of 3 categories: physical, emotional, and cognitive. And if you think about physical coping skills for managing stress, the treatment of stress is the same as the prevention. If we look at exercise as the number 1 most effective way of metabolizing cortisol, it's also the prevention for us to become stressed, right? When you are exercising, just imagine something terrible happens at work and you say, you know what, I'm taking 5 minutes and I'm going for a walk. You come back and crisis averted. You are calmer, your cortisol level has dropped, your endorphin level has increased, and when we create more endorphins and serotonin, we help to mitigate the effect of cortisol. So if we look at stress management as a balancing act of biochemical reactions, let's produce less cortisol. Let's drink less of that Kool-Aid where everybody's upset and there's a lot of drama. You do not have to drink that Kool-Aid and get on that bandwagon. You can say, I'm going to have less stress. I'm not going to let those things upset me. So that's one way to reduce your cortisol. And then the second way is to use these coping skills to drive the level down further by increasing endorphin production, serotonin production, and directly attacking the cortisol with things like exercise. So we know that's what our caveman ancestors did, right? They moved their bodies. We've engineered movement out of our lives. I mean, many of us don't even have to walk more than 10 feet for a meal, let alone go and gather it or hunt it, right? So we need to start thinking about how do we move more? You're such a shining example of that, Julie. I mean, I see you posting on Facebook, baby's down for a nap, it's time for some exercise. I can fit it in here.
Absolutely.
Right?
No excuses.
Absolutely true. So that's our number 1 most effective physical coping skill. But then we have other things like healthy eating. You and I were just talking about this at the break. If you can't pick it or it doesn't have a mother, why are you eating it? If your body does not recognize, here's an analogy I give. Try to put, this would be so much fun to do, but don't do it on your car, do it on your neighbor's car that you don't like. No, I'm kidding. I didn't say that actually on television, did I? So to put hairspray in the gas tank, siphon all the gas out, put hairspray in the gas tank and let's see if the car runs. Will it run?
No.
Because the vehicle doesn't recognize that as a fuel source. So when you put Oreo cookies into your mouth, which have no mother, you can't gather them or hunt them. You know, how is that supposed to nourish your body? Every cell in your body is looking to you to keep it alive. It's like having a baby in your tummy. That baby depends 1,000% on you keeping it alive, right? Because without you, there's no life. It's your cells. The same thing, right? The cells are looking, every cell in your body is looking to you to keep them alive. Are you doing the best? Or are you giving them hairspray? Right? The very best.
That's a great analogy.
The very best is what we all deserve. That is our responsibility to ourselves. So when we nourish ourselves properly, our bodies have the capacity to deal with stress better because we have that foundation of well-being. We need to be well nourished in order to cope with stress. There's a thing called hangry. It's a real thing, people. We get stressed and angry when we're not fed properly. So, you know, the physical things that really make a difference in our cortisol level and help prevent us from becoming distressed are things like exercise, healthy eating, good quality food, progressive muscle relaxation, which is the way, it's one method of relaxation where you contract and relax muscle tissue. It helps to raise your level of serotonin. We know that serotonin has the capacity to mitigate the effect of cortisol. Diaphragmatic breathing, which is the ugly breathing. It's the breathing where your belly gets huge when you breathe in. I'm not going to demonstrate it. And where your belly caves in when you breathe out. It is the opposite of the way we breathe. It's a deep breath. That stimulates the opposite reaction of the stress response. The stress response stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. That's your fight or flight response. When we do diaphragmatic, slow, deep breathing, we flip our mind body into our other nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. Yoga does this too, so does Pilates. These gentle breathing things really help us to flip into parasympathetic. Our cortisol level drops. And then we have things like sleep. And then when we look at the emotional coping skills, it's talking about what's hurting us, what's upsetting us. It's getting it out. It's meditation. It's journaling about how, what went right today, what was good about your day. And then when we look at the cognitive skills, it's looking at how we think, changing the way we think, which is the hardest thing to change. And there's so much help available for these things. The resources are everywhere around us, but if you don't do something to change your life will never change. That's up to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and for sharing so much with us. I'm sure that there's a lot of viewers out there that'll be able to really get something out of this in one way or another. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Julie.
Thank you for watching.